Hey, everybody. Welcome to Thinking Out Loud with PJ. Welcome back to part 2 of Rethinking Evangelism. I trust that you really enjoyed the first video, and if you have not seen it, go back and watch that as well. Make sure that you do that. I will actually link that right above here so that you can get to that quickly and easily. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are going to continue this conversation of what it means to live out the Great Commission and how we can effectively share our faith with others rather than simply leaning on just inviting them to church. We talked about the purpose of the church in the last video. Today, we're going to help you understand better what it looks like to be a part of the community that you are in and how you can better share the gospel. Don't go anywhere. Hey, everybody. Thanks for sticking around, and we have got hopefully some really challenging and encouraging content for you today. I'm going to bring on the same guests that were with me last time. I'm going to bring on Pastor John Anderson, and I'm also going to bring in Pastor John Lashuay. And thanks again for coming back and joining me today, guys. We talked a little bit about what it was for the church to live this out as far as the change. It changes, we equip, we do those things. And again, watch the video from previously. But today I want to talk about then if we really believe that is what it means to live out the Great Commission, then how does that look for people? Okay, so whether it's us personally as pastors or the people in our church. So we have really leaned into this. We have a thing generally once a month that we call good news testimonies. And we want people to share with us. And I know I think both of you guys have done it before as well. And it's simply this: how has God given you opportunities to minister to others? And what I want you to understand today, if you're watching, is when we share these testimonies, we don't always get to say, hey, we led somebody to Christ, or I even got to share the gospel. We literally get excited because somebody was taking out the garbage and their neighbor was taking out the garbage too, and that caused them to stand there on the sidewalk and talk for 10 minutes and not even bring up the gospel, but they have begun to open a door and build the relationship. Yeah. So, talk to me, guys. How is this changing, and what are you seeing both in your lives and in your church?
Yeah, it changes a lot for us. We do very similar things, good news stories. For our church, we even have some good news videos that we've done where we record those stories and then play them for everyone in the church and then share them with other churches, because there's just nothing more powerful, nothing more encouraging than hearing people get excited about the power of God unto salvation, which is the gospel. And so you can go to our website and watch Anita's good news story. And Anita is someone the Lord sent to our church, and she was struggling with depression. She was seeing a psychologist, and she came into the church and she sat down in the church, and she was about ready to get up and leave. But one of our ladies, because we had been developing this disciple-making mindset in the church, this culture where everyone got involved in the ministry, one of the ladies in our church just went over and sat next to her for the service and befriended her. And if that hadn't happened, Anita would have got up, left the church, and probably never would have gone to another church ever again. I don't know that she would have had the courage to do it. But the very next day, this lady invited her over to her house, and they started studying the Bible together. And that blossomed into a disciple-making relationship. And she started to grow, and she started to find her joy in Christ, and she started to find her courage in the Lord. And then eventually was able to tell her psychologist, hey, I don't need to see you anymore. I think I'm good. Just walking with another believer in a local church. And now she's a member, and her family, we've gotten open doors to minister to her family. And I mean, it's just like, seeds of gospel opportunity. And it really was just because we had started changing the culture, started changing the mindset in our church. But, like Josh said, it's not always that big and grandiose of a story. I mean, yesterday I went to the Y, And I was praying the whole time, Lord, just lead me to a spiritually needy person. And I got to have a 20-minute conversation with one guy and just found out a ton about his life and shared some things about my life. And we, at the end of the conversation, was, great to know you. And I know his name. Great to know you. He knew my name. And another guy in the locker room that I had a conversation with, and it was like a 5-10 minute conversation, but those are really intentional on my part to get out in my community and start to form friendships, redemptive relationships in my community. And then I tell that to my church people, and then that is like, oh, well, that doesn't sound too hard. I think I could do that. And they start doing that. And before long, it's everybody in the church purposefully getting outside of the walls of their church, the walls of their home, building these friendships in the community. And the whole purpose of that is the gospel. Eventually, the Lord would give me the opportunity by his grace to share the gospel with them. And there's this trust built between us because we've been friends for a good amount of time. And then we get to share Christ with them. And Lord willing, God does the hard part of causing them to be born again. We just witness, we just share the message, and then watch God work and marvel that he would, by his grace, use us. And we're getting there. It's long, and it takes a lot of work. And but the more you do it, it's like that that mustard seed. It starts really small, but it just grows and grows, and before you know it, it just explodes everywhere. And so we're still in that seed stage. We're still growing, but we're praying and lovingly being obedient and just waiting for God to bless.
It's so contagious, though, isn't it, John? You talked about,
Yeah,
I mean, if
absolutely.
we talk about it and we share testimonies, and we do, the three of us, right? For those of you watching, we Zoom. There's actually four of us that'll Zoom. I think about monthly. We try to do that. We text each other. Though we're in really three completely different parts of the country, we have become good friends, and we are often just sharing, hey, here's what God's doing in my church through this. And when one of these guys texts me and says, pray for this opportunity, or here's an opportunity we had, here's what's happening, it just fires me up, because I'm reminded that God is still building his church, and he can use me. If he can use them, he can use me. And it works the same way in our church. When other people get excited about it, then those who are not doing it sit there and go, well, I could do that. I want to do that. I want those blessings. And it just snowballs.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, is that people need to hear. I think what happens is, what has happened, and this has been my experience, is that too often we feel like, well, I don't have the gift of the evangelist, so therefore, who am I? I don't know what to say. I'm shy. And we make up a lot of different excuses as to why I can't share the gospel. And I think a lot of times we have this false idea that I need to hit a home run every single time I open my mouth and evangelize, right? And I think that's a big challenge for us, that it's as if we've been taught that every single time I go out, every single time I go out evangelizing, every single conversation has to be being able to share the entirety of the gospel, and basically leading someone to the place where they have to either reject or accept Christ. And I think it's just such a flawed view. And evangelism, we see, it's done in the normal rhythms of life. It's done in just conversations. It's about building relationships, about building what I like to call redemptive relationships. We all have influence, every single one of us, but are we having redemptive influence? Are we with an unbeliever? Are we helping them to come to know Jesus? For a believer, we're supposed to have redemptive influence on each other, where we're trying to help each other to grow to be like Jesus. So what I've been trying to emphasize to our people is, we need to be having intentional redemptive influence. And, you may have what we call, who's your one? And you may have a bunch of ones, because it's like, people say, Pastor, I have a few people, but can they all be my one? I mean, it's like, and it's just trying to work through this process. Say, who are you intentionally praying for? Who are you intentionally praying that God would give you opportunity to grow that relationship? It's a redemptive relationship. And just like any relationship that we have, we need to foster it. It has a starting point where you meet somebody, just like John was saying at the Y, you enter into, you get to know, you break the ice, and it's like, okay, you start building that relationship. Well, I think too many people have this idea that every single time I meet somebody, I have to share the gospel with them on the outset. And I personally have really grown to understand that the gospel that I share with people on the outset is what they see, not necessarily what they hear. So I need to be showing the gospel everywhere I go, looking to have redemptive influence in what people see in the way that I live, the message of my life, and be praying that God would open doors of opportunity so that I can share the gospel in word. And I think that's a vital thing for it's a transformation of our evangelistic philosophy, isn't it? You know, and I think what it does is it helps us then to understand I'm evangelizing just in what I do. And doesn't that change how we live our lives? Because it's not just a matter of between 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock on Saturday, I'm evangelizing. And once I did that, because I went door knocking, now I'm done. Right. And I get to move on. I've done my part of evangelism. No, evangelism is in the normal rhythms of life where I'm showing Jesus to others, seeking to have redemptive influence in everything I say, everything I do, and praying for opportunities that God would open doors so that I can then speak Christ into a situation. And I think it's just, for me, it really has freed me to live without the pressure of feeling like I'm dropping the ball on evangelizing, because I there's a person I just walked by them and I didn't tell them about Jesus today, and there's another, and it's like, we can get so overwhelmed, I believe, but God wants us to be His witness, right? His martyrs, sacrificing self and living for Him, showing people in my Jerusalem, Jesus lives in me. I love Him dearly. And
So much of that, John, too, comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of God.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was reading a book by A.W. Tozer, and in the book he said, what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you.
Absolutely.
And then he said, 100 lesser evils can be traced back to a fundamental misunderstanding of God. And I think part of that is the way we have been taught to evangelize people stems from bad theology, right?
Yeah.
The reason I have to give someone the gospel the first time I meet them is, well, they might die in a car wreck on the way home, and now, God wanted him to get saved, but I let him down. And there's this idea that God is such a weak God that He needs our help, or else the Great Commission is going to be a failure, that He's going to look foolish. And you don't find that kind of God in the Bible. It's the exact opposite. We're the one that need God's help. And by His grace, He uses us to reach people with the gospel, but God doesn't need us. We instead get to, by His grace and because we love Him, be a part of this incredible thing of seeing people be born again. And it's exciting, and it should be, the main thing of our life. But to guilt people into, well, you better share the gospel, because if you don't, they're going to die and go to hell, and it's all your fault. That's just bad theology. And some of the way that we correct evangelism is going all the way back to basic theology and basic doctrine, and teaching people to know God.
Yeah. So, I mean, man, you just said exactly. Here's something that we've been trying to teach, that I've been trying to teach in our church, and it's been fun to see people start to get a hold of it. We don't evangelize because it's some legalistic thing we have to do. And then others are just, if we don't, like you said, John, people are going to die and go to hell because we didn't tell them. No, here, the fact is, God doesn't need me to evangelize you, right? If I don't do it, somebody else will. So here's the thing. If I don't do it, somebody else will evangelize you. Somebody else will get the joy. Somebody else will get the reward. So why wouldn't I just do it? So rather than me seeing this as this is something I have to do, I see this as God's the one doing all the work. For some crazy reason, he decided that humans were the vehicle for sharing the word.
Yeah.
And so for some crazy reason, he has put me in that place. I'm literally along for the ride. All I have to do is obey, and God's going to do everything else.
Yeah. I get to be a part of the process.
Yeah.
I have to. It's an I get to. And it's a totally different, it's a transformation of mindset.
Absolutely.
It's fullness of joy.
Yeah.
Because I
Best
love
way to live, and people are like, "No, I'd rather sit home and watch Netflix." You don't know what you're missing.
Oh,
Come
man.
on.
There
To
is
be on the
such.
That's the way.
Go ahead, John Lashuay.
to be on the front lines. I mean, you think about it as a pastor, as a, I try to reinforce to our people, look, all of us are called to be in full-time ministry.
Yeah.
All of whether or not you're paid to do it or not, we're all to be in full-time ministry. And the privilege that the three of us have, that when we're on the front lines of ministry, we get to see people at their worst moments, and we have the privilege of speaking into those lives to help them come out by the grace of God, or we see them go from the worst to just thriving, and as God moves mightily in their lives. And it's a privilege to be involved in ministry, but all of us are called to be a part of ministry, and all of us can have that great privilege in some way, shape, or form. God desires to use each of us, and it's an I get to, not a I have to. And I think that's just it changes the way I think about it.
John, you're a disciple maker who happens to be a pastor.
Yeah.
Yes,
right?
that's exactly
Or
it. Exactly.
you're a nurse, or you're a disciple maker who happens to be a nurse.
Yeah.
We've got that so backwards.
Yeah.
If we just flip that,
Yeah,
it would just transform the way that we think about life and ministry.
I have tried to throw out, I've even talked about it from the pulpit, don't call me somebody who's in full-time ministry. Every Christian is in full-time ministry. You can call me in vocational ministry, that's accurate. But each and every one of us, if you're working in an office, if you're driving a truck, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you are in full-time ministry. And you also need to understand that when you show up for work, you are there because God has put you there. You don't live where you live on accident. You don't work where you work on accident. God put you there, and he put you in the midst of people who are in your Jerusalem. Those are the people you need to reach. And we need to realize that. I think maybe that's the way we need to close this up, guys. And we've talked about this. And John Lashuay, you mentioned it. You talked about witnessing it's not just about our words. But what I want to be careful of, and I know that's not what you meant, is this isn't lifestyle evangelism either, right? Where we just simply live this good life and hope people somehow get saved through it. The Bible clearly says that they're not going to get saved without, how can they believe if they haven't heard? And so we recognize that. But really for me, I think what's changed this, and maybe this will help people understand as we close this up here. Luke 19:10 says, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. And if you study that word out, seek, it's not just looking for. Jesus didn't just come looking for me. That word seek literally means to plot against. Okay, there was a strategy involved in winning me and drawing me to himself. Well, you and I as Christians need to use that same idea, a strategy involved. So God has put us in places on purpose. But I've also heard people say, Pastor, I don't know anybody. All right. My circle is so small that I go to church and I go home and I just don't really have a circle of friends that are lost. So here's what I'm going to tell you. Get a circle of friends that are lost, right? Mm-hmm. We have to be intentional. We have to put ourselves in a place. Yeah. Our assistant pastor has been praying for a long time about this, and he's been very much being able to witness to his neighbors and the people in his community, and it's been fun to watch that. But just the other day, he was so excited. He came and he said to me, Pastor, I've figured out what I'm going to do. And this is a great example that witnessing doesn't have to be drudgery. He said, I'm going to join a disc golf league, right?
Hey.
So we go, oh, he's just wasting his time having fun. No, he's intentionally building relationships while having fun, right? John, you talked about the joy. We don't have to have boring lives as Christians. We can naturally get involved and build relationships, and it's okay to enjoy friendships with lost people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It leads to fruitful lives, spiritually fruitful lives. And there
Amen.
is no greater joy. It's God working through you, and you're delighting in knowing God more, and he reveals more of his will to you, and you delight to joyfully obey it. And then God causes you to be spiritually fruitful. It is the way that the Christian life is to be lived. And so many of us don't know fullness of joy, don't know pleasure forevermore, don't know the true path of life because we have settled for the scraps of the world. And we're feasting our souls. We're giving over our affections to the crumbs of the world. And we're so full of that we don't have any room for the great things that God has to offer. And making disciples is primary to that.
I have a feeling we'll have some more conversations about this in the days to come, guys. But again, I want to thank each of you for being a part of this. I have enjoyed these conversations that we have just naturally often. So I thought it would be great just to get together and record a conversation for you guys. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments as well, and maybe it will give us an idea for something that we can do for another video to answer maybe some of those questions. None of us are trying to tell you that we have it figured out, because we're constantly fighting against our fleshly desires. We're constantly fighting against apathy, and we're still learning, absolutely still learning. But we wanted to share and just say, guys, God has a work for each of us. Let's get going. Maybe you're a pastor, and this has been a challenge to you to think about how you've been teaching and leading your people. Maybe just as a church member, this has really helped you to say, man, I have got a job to do. I need to get out there and witness. We hope this has been a challenge to you. And as always, I would love it if you would subscribe. That, again, just encourages me. It's great as the channel grows. Hit the like button. That helps other people see what's going on here. And I would love it if this was a challenge to you. Share it with your friends. And if you're brand new to this channel, there's all kinds of videos. My goal is to help you to think different and to think biblically. Romans 12:2 says that we are transformed by the renewing of our minds, and our minds are renewed through Scripture. And so we want to help you think biblically here today. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you on the next video. Goodbye.